And for more on the disaster, recovery efforts, and the impact on the region's economy, we're joined live from New York by Jean-Paul Rodrigue. He is a professor of global studies and geography at Hofstra University. Jean-Paul, thank you for joining us this evening.
Good evening.
Jean-Paul, the human loss of this disaster is, of course, devastating, but the economic implications are also extremely far-reaching. Tianjin is the world's third largest port in terms of cargo volume. So let's start with the immediate impact. Which facilities were destroyed by the explosion, and what is the financial loss there?
Okay, first, it's important to underline that the port terminal themselves have not been impacted, or at least not that I'm aware of. What has been impacted is an area in the back area of the port which handles logistics, container shipments, shipping, I would say, and also car storage facilities. So in a sense, Tianjin lost a chunk of its logistical capabilities, and that's obviously a subject of concern. And there will be a fair amount of consequences for that. Already suppliers are, in a sense, slowing down their process, and some car manufacturers already slowed down their or shut down their facilities.
A big issue indeed, but shipping and cargo operations have now resumed, is that correct?
Yeah, it's correct.
So if they're resumed, how long before things are back to normal? What is the main concern then if the shipping operations are back on track?
The main concern, it relates obviously to contamination. The managers are not aware when, in a sense, the facilities are going to be able to reopen and where, let's say, they're going to start to resume operations in the area of the port effectively. So that's an issue of concern. And the more time, the more delays, the more cost, and the more disruptions.
Well, what about the fact that it's one of Eastern China's most important oil and gas terminals, also a very important point of entry for iron ore? What are the implications of this?
In my opinion, they are at this point minimal, because usually these type of commodities are stored in very big stockpiles. So there is, I would assume, a lot of stockpiles available for quite a while.
All right, on the upside, let's talk about the several companies and plants and facilities near the port that have had to stop work. We just heard from Owen that Toyota's production has been suspended until Wednesday. John Deere have said that they'll halt work indefinitely. What are the implications of this?
This is going to have a fair amount of impact on the, of course, car manufacturing sector, but it's very, I would say, difficult because there's so many customers and supply chains connected with the port that you can only assess the consequences and the impact after the event took place. This is very common in other parts of the world where something goes wrong. We find afterwards who is basically dependent and impacted by such impact. So over the next, I would say, a couple of weeks, we're going to be able to assess the full extent.
Well, one sector that we have mentioned will be affected is the auto industry. Roughly 40% of cars imported to China pass through Tianjin's port. How significant do you think this will impact the auto industry?
I'm not entirely certain. Again, it depends upon their stockpiles. It depends upon who is using what. And if you can have other alternatives, you can use other ports if you need to import or export the parts that you need.
Well, China Vanke, which is the largest residential developer in China, said that over 5,200 of its residential units at 3 of its developments were affected by the blast. Now, Jean-Paul, isn't it unusual to have residential developments in this type of vicinity next to ports and warehouses?
I would say yes, this is quite unusual, particularly when you have hazardous materials involved. Around the world, there are many real estate development in relative proximity of ports. That's not a big issue, but they usually do not involve any proximity to any site handling hazardous material. So this is rather unusual. I would say some kind of dysfunctional process of planning when these areas were settled.
What about the insurance companies? They're going to obviously be taking a big hit. I know that Zurich Insurance Group and Allianz have reportedly received some claims. Do you have any kind of ballpark estimate about what these insurance companies could be in for?
No, that's anyone's guess. Because the site is not available, it's going to be a lot of inventory to take place. What are the delays in terms of also what has been damaged, to what extent, what are the type of coverage. It's going to be a long puzzle to sort out, I would assume. And the figures that have been put out so far are anyone's guess. but it's quite clear that the insurance are going to take some kind of a hit.
Jean-Paul, very quickly, what can the authorities learn from this?
I think in many ports in China, since China has been growing very, very rapidly, the priority was to build and operate infrastructure because it was fulfilling national commercial interest. But with this did not come much of a culture of safety, and that's going to be the next step for many of these type of operation, to revise the procedure and to see what is at risk and what could be the potential impact of something like that. I hope this is not going to happen again, but it is always a risk.
All right, thank you so much, Jean-Paul Rodrigue, Professor of Global Studies and Geography at Hofstra University. And for more on the Tianjin disaster and its economic impact, check out cctv-america.com. There you'll also learn more about the environmental risks that the people living in the area now face. That's cctv-america.com. And coming